In the last section, we wrote out 4 comments to guide us through the process of getting some content to show on the screen of our device. In this section, we're going to tackle step number 1, which is to import some code into our project so that we can actually work with our mobile device and get some content to show up. So before we write any code for this, I want to tell you a little bit more about how import statements work. All right, so quick diagram right here. Okay, so in the very center of this diagram is our application. And right now, our entire application consists of just the main.dart file. Outside of our application, we have access to a ton of different code. So we have access to the entire Dart standard library, which we took a little bit of a glance at the documentation for. And we also have the entire Flutter standard library as well, which includes a lot of default widgets and things to help us build out mobile applications. In order to get access to any of this code inside of our application, we have to first import it into our project, or more specifically, import it into the file that we're working on. So if I want to say import a file from the Flutter standard library into my main.dart file, I have to write out an import statement that tries to specifically go into the Flutter standard library package, find some module inside of here, and then specifically add that module to my main.dart file. Now there's some very specific syntax around this. So let's look back over to our code editor. We're going to add our import statement, and then we'll talk about how that syntax works. All right, so underneath this first comment, I'm going to write out import. I'm then going to put a set of single quotes. I'll say package :flutter / material.dart, like so. Okay, so that's our first import statement. Now, before we talk about the exact syntax of this import statement, I want to let you know one very important thing here. In Dart, there are 3 different types of import statements. The syntax around the import statement is going to change slightly depending upon where we are importing code from. So what you're seeing right here is how we write an import statement to import code from a third-party package. If we're writing an import statement to import code from the Dart standard library, or to import code from a file that you and I have written inside of our project directory, then this syntax is going to change just a little bit. So this is one form of syntax, and very shortly we'll see those other 2 forms as well. Okay, so now let's break down the syntax right here and talk about what's going on. All right, here we go. So here's that entire line of code broken down step by step. So the first word, I think you get a good sense of what's going on there. It's an import keyword. It's telling Dart we want to import some other file into this one. Then inside of that string is where things start to get really interesting. So the first word is package and then a colon. The word package specifically tells Dart that we're trying to import code from a third-party library that has been installed into our project. If we are importing code from the Dart standard library or from a file that you and I wrote, then we're not going to have this word there, but we'll talk more about those import statements later on when we actually make use of them. After we write out package and then our colon, we then place the name of the library that we want to import code from. So in this case, we're trying to import some code from the Flutter library. We then place a slash and then the name of the file that we're trying to import. So in this case, we're trying to import the material.dart file from the Flutter library. Now, this last part right here might seem a little bit scary. You might be thinking, well, Stephen, how will I know what file I want to import from this library? And for that, don't sweat it. The documentation for the for the library that you're using is always going to tell you more or less exactly what file you want to import into your project. So in general, if you read the documentation, you're going to have a good idea of exactly what file you're trying to import. Okay, so that's what's going on with this line of code right here. So now that we've imported this file into our project, which has some helpers to get content on the screen, we'll continue in the next section where we'll define our main function and then continue on with the rest of our steps. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.